All right, welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to continue our questioning, and this time we're going to delve into some health issues, an important area of healthcare. Obviously, a lot of the presidential candidates have been dealing with this issue. So similarly here in the U.S. Senate level, we certainly want to get some answers from our candidates. And let's start the questioning in this area with Ms. Rachel Wulff. Rachel?
Thank you, Jeff. So a lot has been said about the Affordable Care Act, and several years ago when it was put into place, people were worried that premiums were going to go up. And in the last few weeks, we've really seen the devastating impact that it will have on the American economy, and specifically for the people who it's supposed to help the most. We know that premiums are supposed to go up between 17 and 24% next year. What needs to happen with the Affordable Care Act? Does it need to be repealed? Does it need to be tweaked? What would you suggest, if elected, to fix this problem, because it is going to burden the people, again, that is designed to help?
All right, and we'll start the answers with Mr. Marsala.
So on that, actually, I recently tweaked my back doing some yard work, and I went in and it was going to be $150 for the immediate care. We've got to fix that. So what we've done with affordable health care is made it so that the most people don't go to the doctor because of the high deductible. And basically it is repealing it. However, politically, if you're going to get something done, you're going to have to compromise. And I think that the Democratic Party is going to want to see that something was kept in place. So there's a way of repealing it, but taking out what's bad and still telling them that, yeah, we kept your signature policy. Because there is so much allegiance to that, I think it won't sell. And what I've seen politically happen is a revolt when you try to just beat something. It's going to have to be a bipartisan solution to solving that. Also, it should be tax deductible. It really is a tax. I mean, we've actually increased premiums on one group of people to giving coverage to another one, so it should be deductible.
Thank you, Mr. Marsala. Mr. Billiot.
Well, the Affordable Care Act has lots of good things in it. It has certain elements that are very beneficial to those that couldn't afford insurance before, but it's putting a burden on those that can afford it. And so, again, it's a Robin Hood scenario where you're taking from one group to give to the other. Now, what we need to do as a governing body, whether it's the Senate or the House, we need to look at this bill and take it for what it's for, health care. 25,000-page bill doesn't cover all health care. There's too much fat and pork built into these bills. We as legislators must take control of our government and make sure that the bills that we pass are specifically geared towards the intent of what we're trying to do, and not try to pass buddy-buddy bills under the cover of good government. And it's not only with the health care, it's with everything that we actually do. So the health care, we should take the parts that work, remove the parts that don't, and then come up with an end result that will help everyone. But we got to get rid of the waste, fraud, and abuse in our system.
Thank you, Mr. Billiot. Mr. Crawford.
Well, Obamacare definitely needs to be repealed before it implodes on itself. We've seen a couple of states where there's only one payer left, there's only one insurance company to choose from, and basically it's going to self-destruct. So it's better to do something about it before self-destruction occurs. The reason behind it was medical bankruptcy. That was the largest form of or cause of bankruptcy in the country. And in fact, when I was 18, I had to sign a mortgage after my dad died to pay $30,000 in medical bills. So there's got to be a way to have insurance that works for people. Another thing is pre-existing conditions. There's no reason why if you work for a company for 20, 30, 40 years, something happens, you get laid off, that you only have 18 months of COBRA, and then you're thrown out into the pool with everybody else fighting for your own health insurance. Something's got to be done. If we could solve those two problems, then the commercial market's going to take care of itself.
Thank you, Mr. Crawford. Mr. Hebert?
Well, Rachel, a great question. I actually have found a solution to the healthcare crisis. That is marry a doctor. I have been blessed and I have married up, but the truth of the matter is that when it comes to healthcare, the last people that we want fixing the healthcare crisis is the government. I think it was Ronald Reagan that said one time that I'm here from the government, I'm here to help. That's the 12 scariest words in the world. How in the world can we expect the government to fix anything? They just break things. And more specifically is that I think the bureaucracy and the regulations that they have put on healthcare, when you go talk to any healthcare provider, whether it's a doctor's office or a hospital, what you'll find is the fastest growing segment and the people that they hire the most are administrators and pencil pushers to follow all these regulations instead of hiring doctors and nurses that actually make people feel better. So the bureaucracy and the red tape that we're putting on these providers, there's just no way that we can continue affording that, and I think we need to change that.
All right, thank you, Mr. Hebert. We'll stay in this area for our next question. It'll come from Mr. Jimmy Delery.
Okay. I want to ask a question that I think will help define the future of healthcare. For years, I've been associated with the Australian medical people, and they have a different approach. They're more about preventative healthcare and primary healthcare to sort of ward off the major, because here in America, you know, they want to basically let you get to the heart attack rather than preventing it. And that's the more expensive part. And I also have to say, sometimes I had to make this plea with my own mother. She got a pacemaker at 87. And my question was, what do you plan on doing with your life at 87 that a 30-year-old father of children might be denied that health care? So what is your thoughts about changing our perspective to health care?
All right, we'll start with Mr. Billiot.
Well, we need to change our perspective, because right now we've got people that use the healthcare system and they abuse the system. We have the most generous system out as far as helping those that can't help themselves. We need to approach this again from a systemic point of view. We need to be proactive, just as you suggested, and not reactive. We need to encourage people to go out and take better care of themselves. That all comes back with self-worth. People that have a job and they work hard, they have more self-worth involved. And when we have more people on the system getting everything for free or very well given, it's unappreciated. So if you're given a life, you underappreciate that life. But if you have to work for that life, you're willing to put more into that life. So that may be a little strange analogy, but anything that's free, you don't put a lot of effort into. But if you're paying for it and you're having a vested interest, it's worth more.
Mr. Crawford.
Well, I think it's great to look at all the other countries in the world and see how they're doing things, and you can see both sides of it. You can see examples of success and examples of failure, and so we should look around to find out what everybody's doing to plan for our future with healthcare. You know, going to a doctor for a regular checkup, I do that every year, and I'm just fortunate enough to be able to afford it. Whether I have to pay a copay or I pay the whole thing out of my pocket, I think it's important to keep up with things. But not everybody's that fortunate. I think a problem with just giving free preventative health care to everybody is I don't know that we have enough first-line providers of that. There's not a lot of primary care physicians that have availability. Sometimes you're waiting months, and really that's something that the hospitals and the training centers for physicians need to get in talks with the government to figure out how many doctors do we need based on our population growth. So there's a lot of planning that needs to go on, but it is a great idea to look around and try to plan to prevent things as opposed to wait for a catastrophe to happen.
Thank you, Mr. Crawford. Mr. Hebert?
Well, Jimmy, the first thing we need to do is Dr. Bustani and Dr. Fleming needs to stop subsidizing Boudin hog cracklings, and because too many people eating that get heart disease. I think Mr. Crawford and Mr. Billiot are right on target. You know, nothing is free, but for some reason in America we think healthcare is free. And it's either because the government's paying for it or some big insurance company's paying for it. And so I think they're right on target with their statements, and I agree that sooner or later, you know, the bill comes to somebody, and most of the time it comes to those of us who work and pay taxes. And the problem is that we have more people taken out of the bucket than putting in the bucket. So we need to change that mentality. How do we do it? I don't know, but I can tell you this much, is that the bucket's running out real fast, and the options that they're trying to go, it only just makes things worse.
Thank you, Mr. Hebert. Mr. Marsala?
So I do think we are seeing an effort to have better diet and exercise. We've obviously seen people take care of themselves better, except in Louisiana, where we're still eating a lot of gumbo and other foods. What we need to do, though, is opiates. We have our people here taking so much money from the drug industry and allowing so many pills to be prescribed that we're causing our own problem on that end. And that's something that we could fix, because the back end, we're now seeing that Dr. Bustani put a bill in to build more drug treatment facilities. We'll just cut down on the amount of drugs being issued. And the other thing that I want to address, which is another topic, is Medicaid clawback. You know, I know a lot of people that work hard, they leave their spouse with a house and an IRA. And if you get injured and you need to go in a nursing home because you got overprescribed drugs, the first thing they want to do is take all your money back and then go after your house. We need to protect that because people want to work hard and leave a legacy to their kids or their spouse.
All right, thank you, Mr. Marsala. Now we're going to shift gears and move into another area of the debate. And of course, here in Louisiana, the environment is very important. We have many issues based on our propensity to deal with flooding and, of course, hurricanes and, of course, coastal erosion. So these are important issues that we want to hear from the candidates on. And let's start this line of questioning with Ms. Rachel Wulff. Rachel.
Gentlemen, do you think that coastal restoration should be a national issue? And along that line of thinking, I'm going to add this on. Do you think that the oil and gas companies should be responsible for rebuilding the coastline, specifically here in Louisiana?
And we'll start with you, Mr. Crawford.
Well, I think it is a national concern, absolutely. We have 90% of the offshore energy comes from the Gulf. 30% of the total oil and gas production comes from the Gulf. We have a port that serves 31 states, and billions of pounds of seafood get shipped all over the country. So it's definitely something that the entire country benefits from. And I think of it along the lines of, the coast, if you think about it, maybe it's like the toes on your body. Would you just let your toes get chopped off, and how would that affect your body? How would it affect your walk or being able to run? Because of the things I just described, the coast is so very important for the whole country. How are we going to fix it, though? It's going to take billions of dollars, even according to the experts that look at it. I think there needs to be a plan, and there is one that's already been suggested, but we have to find the money to pay for it. And again, I'll go back to the economy. If we have millions of people out of work not paying tax, we're not going to have the money to fund anything, and so we need to get people back to work.
Thank you, Mr. Crawford. Mr. Hebert.
Well, Rachel, in particular, you asked about if the oil industry should be held responsible. Goes back to my earlier statement. You cannot change the rules in the middle of the game. Whether the oil companies are at fault or not, they played under the rules that were set up by the state legislature and a lot of times the federal government, and they followed those rules. Now, let me say this. If they wasn't following the rules, then shame on the bureaucrats for back then letting them get away with it. But the last thing we need is what's going on today in Louisiana, where we are pretty much sicking the dogs on them, which is the lawyers, to go and sue them. Because at the end of the day, the people that's going to get the money is going to be the lawyers, and that goes back to the litigation. I think that, again, from today forward, we need to make sure that we're very conscious with our coast and making sure that we're not doing anything to deplete it. But the last thing we need is to turn the lawyers loose on an industry that's already hurting, costing people thousands of jobs, millions of dollars of tax dollars, and that's just not the answer. Lawyers and litigation is not the answer to solving this problem.
Thank you, Mr. Hebert. Mr. Marsala?
So we have a situation where Shell has donated $1 million back for a program to try to solve some problems. And these companies, I think, do want to help going forward because their workers live along the coast. And we've also seen companies like Stone Energy file bankruptcy. So if you were going to go after some of these companies, I think their first reaction would be to file bankruptcy. And right now, times are so tough, it would happen anyway. There are a lot of projects in place on how to restore the coast. And one of the things we have to make sure is we don't lose that 37.5% money that we're supposed to start getting next year, which is up to $150 million to $500 million, that the feds want to keep. So it is a national problem. We do supply so much energy. But there are also ways that we need to look at from an engineering principle. And I've been down on the coast a lot during the last 18 months in all the cities, figuring out, do sediment pipelines work? Do diversions work? What's the best method? So if you go into it as an engineer, which I am, and look at what analysis can be the most beneficial and bang for the buck, that could cut down the cost.
All right, thank you, Mr. Marsala. Mr. Billiot?
Well, Rachel, first I want to say one thing. Oil and gas isn't the only problem we have with coastal erosion. It's a big issue, but the biggest problem that we have is we're choking off the delta. We're choking off the feeding tube to the delta. We, the people, because we don't approach things from a systemic point of view, we decide to levee up the Mississippi River, divert all of its sediment and all of this rich nutrients down into the Gulf of Mexico, not allowing it to seep over its banks into the farmland to naturally fertilize. So here we have a problem where we're not naturally fertilizing, we're chemically fertilizing. That goes back in the water, creating dead zones. This is a whole big problem. Nature has a way of fixing itself. The earth is a huge filter. Now, we need to approach this from a systemic point of view. We have to make sure that we hold the oil industries accountable to the things that they do, but here we go on the other side, want to ask them to come and create jobs, but we're going to sue them and put them out of business. So I think we need to approach this very smart. We need to hold them accountable to what they're supposed to do, but make it reasonable and take accountability for what we've done wrong.
All right, thank you, Mr. Billiot. We're going to continue in this area for another question, and it'll come from Mr. Jimmy Delery.
Okay, previously Senator Landrieu fought in Washington to define Louisiana's coast as America's coast, and it really is a national jewel. So my question to you, are you willing to go to Washington to fight for our fair share of money to increase our infrastructure for our seafood industry, where we're not shipping off, for instance, from St. Bernard, our oysters and our crabs go to Alabama and Maryland and Virginia. We have no value added. They come off the boat into a truck and we say goodbye. So our money is at the least value on the whole process. The other thing is, I believe, it's going to take a national effort. Louisiana needs to be the front runner in coastal restoration and activities like ecotourism. So will you go to Washington and fight to get money to come back and help Louisiana invest in itself?
All right, thank you, Jimmy. Let's start the answers on this question with Mr. Hebert.
Well, Jimmy, first of all, let me say this about going to Washington and fighting to bring money back. The first thing I want to go to Washington to do is fight to stop sending money to Washington, okay? Because the problem is we send $1 and we get back $0.25. And that's the game, and I've been in politics a long time, and that's the game we play. When it comes to, I mean, think about how blessed we are in Louisiana, all the things that you just said. And we do need to protect that, and we feed not only the nation, but the world, and when it comes to some of the best seafood in the world. I do believe this, though, that, you know, I think we have a lot of foreigners that have come over. Where I'm from, there's a little town called Delcombe, where we used to have a lot of American shrimpers. Now it's nothing but foreign shrimpers. And the reason I bring that up is that I don't think they're as conscientious about the environment as American shrimpers were, because they would just take better care versus, I think some of the foreigners come in, they wipe out everything, and they leave the traps and everything else, and it's a big old mess. And I think it's catching up with us, and I think sooner or later it's going to cost us.
Thank you, Mr. Hebert. Mr. Marsala?
So the Mississippi River Delta has been called the Amazon of North America. And we're seeing an area where it's going to change, because as we start talking about climate change, and it's real, the waters are rising by 3 to 4 millimeters a year, and the rate is expected to increase. We have to recognize that you talk about hot August nights, it's a hot November night. We've had the hottest summer here we've had in a long time. We've got to deal with that issue, and we can do that through ecotourism. I actually have a TV show called Awesome Wildlife Effort, where I tour the coast and meet with these people down there, what they're doing, and also look at the challenges that they're facing to keep their culture alive. We have a lot of tourism in New Orleans. You can come into New Orleans and then feed people out, and also show them how we're restoring the waters, because it's the whole 38 states that feed into the Mississippi River Basin should be coming down here once a year and seeing what we're doing on water and how we're cleaning up the dead zone in the Gulf, which is currently over 6,000 square miles, and addressing some of these other issues, which everybody has right now. There's more than 500 dead zones in the world.
Thank you, Mr. Marsala. Mr. Billiot?
Well, you know, we only got a minute to answer a question we could probably write a book upon. So we do have an issue, and I am going to go to Washington, and I will fight for Louisiana's rights and for our coastline. We feed the world, just like Mr. Hebert said. All the seafood and all the industry that comes out of Louisiana coastline. I'm from a fishing family. I was born on the back of a boat shoveling fish from the age, as soon as I can walk, I was a deckhand, you know, because we were poor, we couldn't afford help. You get on the boat. You can walk, you can talk, get on the boat. So it's important that we fight for the cultural establishment of Louisiana, what brought us to where we are. We need to make sure that people want to come and see how Louisiana really lives. The television show Swamp People was over-dramatized. It wasn't real. Let's get ecotourism. Let's get them out here looking at what we really do. Let's make sure that the world knows the importance of the Louisiana coastline. And if you can show them, and you can, through leadership, show them the importance, then we can have them buy into it. We don't have to ask for it. They'll send it to us.
Thank you, Mr. Billiot. Mr. Crawford?
Well, as far as money goes, getting it from Washington, I think to the degree that different things have caused the dead zone in the Gulf, and that's going to help protect the establishment of seafood industry going out into the future to feed the rest of the country. Absolutely, we need to do something. There is so much food that comes out of the Gulf for the country. So that is very important to secure that. But just getting money for other reasons from the government, I mean, we need to stop. All the states shouldn't go begging to the federal government for $1. They need to be self-sufficient, and they need to develop that expertise within their own legislatures. As far as ecotourism goes, I think that's a great idea. I know the Lieutenant Governor's office is responsible for promoting tourism within the state, and I've heard the Lieutenant Governor speak a few times, and so I think he is definitely on the right track promoting the state, and I think ecotourism is just another aspect of tourism that Louisiana can be known for. It just needs to be promoted properly.
All right, thank you, Mr. Crawford. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take a brief time out. When we come back, we're going to shift gears, talk about another very important area, and that is the area of foreign policy and national security. That's next here on our U.S. Senate debate.